David, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you very much for having me.
Okay, genocide in Nigeria. Give us I'm seeing obviously there's a lot of chatter right now about a genocide going on, a Christian genocide. Others I'm seeing accounts of people saying there is no genocide. This is exaggerated. It's not actually true. Tell us what's actually going on.
So what's going on in Nigeria is that a lot of people are dying and a lot of people have been dying for a long time. I'm looking right now at a 2022 report, which was actually published by the US State Department, the Nigeria 2022 International Religious Freedom Report. And on the first page of the report, that's the executive summary page of the report, it said in 2022, there continue to be frequent violent incidents, particularly in the northern part of the country, affecting both Muslims and Christians, resulting in numerous deaths. So that's the US State Department in its own words, stating what the problem is. That both Christians and Muslims are dying in numbers. And then you have the US president coming out to fraudulently misrepresent the situation and say there is a Christian genocide. Not that there's a Nigerian genocide, that there's a specifically Christian genocide, when the data that is available shows that actually, overall, more Muslims have died than Christians in this violence that is taking place in Nigeria. So, which leads one to then ask, what could be the motivation or the incentive to misrepresent the situation this egregiously, especially given that the US government itself, as I just read, has its own research documents showing pretty much the exact opposite. And the obvious inference is twofold. First of all, um, there needs to be an excuse to go into Nigeria, and this seems to be the only useful entry point, exploiting local religious and, to an extent, ethnic tensions, because those tensions do exist in Nigeria. There absolutely are religious and ethnic divisions in Nigeria. And very unfortunately, this pronouncement of his has found, to an extent, a very willing and eager audience in Nigeria, because there are people who want to hear that America is going to come in and somehow is going to solve all their problems for them by punishing this other group of people that they don't like. There definitely is that. And then the flip side of that is, um, why does he need that pretext to get into Nigeria? What's he looking for? And then when you sort of zoom out from the wider geopolitical context and think, what value does Nigeria offer to the US or to Donald Trump right now? And the things you can point to immediately are, first of all, Nigeria appears to be the only country left in Africa which is rich in the very minerals, I guess, that the US is hunting around the world for, which doesn't seem to have any particularly strong geopolitical alignments just yet. Nigeria officially is a non-aligned country. Obviously, in practice, it functions as a US client state, but in theory, still remains a non-aligned country. In theory, still maintains good diplomatic and trade relations with Russia and China, in addition to the US. So there's this paradoxical situation in Nigeria where diplomatically, Nigeria often functions as a US client state, and economically, Nigeria functions essentially as an appendage of the IMF, right? It's not economically sovereign at all. However, on the flip side, Nigeria regularly signs a lot of cooperation deals and contracts and agreements with the Chinese government. I'm sure you must have seen this figure flying around that this year alone, China has agreed $21 billion worth of infrastructure deals in Nigeria.
Mhm.
So that's the sort of weird geopolitical space that Nigeria is in. So I would imagine that someone in the Trump administration has taken a look and said, right, this is a country which doesn't have a strong alignment. This is a country which doesn't know where it stands. This is a country that hasn't picked a side and has everything we want, and it's suitably weak, and it's there for the taking.
Mm.
So that's one. And then I would also imagine that just by virtue of its location, um, it offers two things. So first, it's essentially the gateway to the Sahel region, which the US considers to be Russian territory now. Because as I'm sure you all know, the three three countries of the Sahelian Alliance, Niger, Burkina Faso, and Mali, have a very close diplomatic and military cooperation with the US, with Russia, which the US government has interpreted to mean that they have picked a side, which they probably
Mm-hmm.
have. Nigeria, Nigeria has 1,000 kilometers of border with Niger. It has the longest single border with any AES country of all the ECOWAS countries. So it presents a wonderful opportunity to carry out military operations in this place that is considered to be Russian and aligned or Russian dominated now. And then what further complicates that is going by the so-called Monroe Doctrine, which the Trump administration has sort of revamped and sort of, you know, gone full speed ahead on. I mean, the
Mm-hmm.
Monroe Doctrine has always existed, but under the Trump administration specifically, that appears to have been something that they have gone full speed ahead on. So they've tactically pared back a bit from maybe like the South China Sea and some parts of the South Pacific. And they're more focused now on the Caribbean, the Americas, and the Atlantic region, which unfortunately Nigeria happens to fall into. So according to the Monroe Doctrine, any country within that region of the world, be it the Americas, the Caribbean, and the Atlantic, which includes West Africa, these countries are not considered by the US government to be sovereign,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because it considers that entire region to be its natural sphere of influence, to be its domain.
Yeah.
And fortunately or unfortunately, Nigeria also happens to be a country which China considers to be integral to its Belt and Road Initiative. So essentially, Nigeria is a battleground state now through no real choice of its own, just by, I guess, the accident of geography and a sort of structural unwillingness to adopt a strong geopolitical position on anything. The Nigerian government for decades has insisted on this, what I consider to be a failed policy of official non-alignment. So for decades, the Nigerian government has refused to take strong positions on anything. So any issue you can think of, be it Palestine, be it African unity and sovereignty or Pan-Africanism, be it anti-imperialism, the Nigerian government never takes a strong position on anything. It has the most lukewarm and diplomatic positioning that you've ever seen. To
Mm.
put that in perspective, a few days ago, there was a vote at the UN General Assembly about a day. Essentially, I think it was a vote on the day calling for an end to colonialism. It's a largely symbolic vote. It really has no power. And I believe the US and Israel were the only two states to actually vote against this, which is not a surprise. But Nigeria, for whatever reason, chose to not vote
Mm.
because even to vote yes would appear to be to be taking a stand that is too strong for the
Yeah.
Nigerian establishment. So that's the kind of country Nigeria is. So it's just there for the taking. It's a battleground state that doesn't realize that it's a battleground state. It's the proverbial grass that two elephants are about to have a fight on. And I guess the more aggressive elephant is the one taking the initiative now and making these threats.
So you don't think that the rhetoric about the genocide and the U.S. wanting to march in and save the Christians, you don't believe that. You think it's actually geopolitical strategy.
So I don't think anybody believes that, except maybe a few people who are sort of overdosed on their religious sentiments, back
Mm-hmm.
home. But almost anyone who has any knowledge of the situation knows that this has nothing to do with saving the Christians. To put that in perspective, last time Donald Trump pulled out this sort of stunt claiming that there is some genocide in some country that he may or may not like, which was in South Africa, he backed up the talk with some sort of action. He, after claiming that there was a genocide against white people in South Africa, he opened up a refugee pathway specifically for white South Africans. So even if, whether he actually believed it or not, he backed it up with action. In this case, he's claiming that there's a Christian genocide in Nigeria, and he's basically made it harder for Nigerians of any description to get into the US.
Mm.
So it's clear that there's a very even if you were to take his words at face value, there's a very big disparity between how one group of people is being treated and how another group of people is being treated. So,
Well, right. And that I think is a telling sign. You've got all these people, I see it all over social media, I'm sure you do too. All these people saying, well,
yes.
America is a Christian country. America's a Christian, we need to save Christianity. We need to save Christianity. And yet, okay, what about Black Christians? I mean, they're not letting in these African Christians, right? They'd let in the white
Yeah,
Christians from, or the white
of
people
course.
from South Africa, but not the Christians. I mean, if we're truly a Christian nation and they're saying we got to save Christianity, then yeah, you're right. Why not do the same thing that you offered the South American whites that you said were under a genocide? Why not open up the doors for the Christians in Nigeria? But maybe we're not actually a Christian country. Maybe we're a white Christian country, and that's what they actually mean.
I mean, the very foundational premise of Christian nationalism in the American sense, I think is actually very important. That maybe it's something that needs to be heard coming from people who are actually American. Because when people like me say it back home, I feel like maybe people think that I'm making this up or I don't know what I'm talking about. Because there is this very fundamentally mistaken idea in Nigeria that Christian nationalism in the American sense is primarily about Jesus, and that people who consider themselves to be Christian nationalists in the US somehow see themselves as the same as these Nigerian Christians. And there's this total absence of understanding that even the term Christian nationalism means something completely different. So the words look familiar. You understand the meaning of the words, right? But the syntax is completely different.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and it's an issue that I deal with all the time in Nigeria because a lot of Nigerians grew up. You may or may not be aware of this. A lot of the Nigerian information space is heavily dominated by US or US funded sources. So it's not
Mm.
just the media, it's also even the religious media. So most Nigerian Christians grew up watching TD Jakes, Creflo Dollar, Kenneth, what's his name? All of these like major American prosperity preachers. So there's been this mistaken idea in the Nigerian space that Nigerians are sort of like deputy Americans almost. I don't know if that makes sense. So they have this
Mm.
extremely false self-image. So for many, seeing Donald Trump making these comments was this extremely what's the word? It felt so validating and
Yeah.
self-affirming for them that, oh well, despite what people like David have said for a long time, actually these white Christian evangelicals in America actually do see us as their Christian brothers. They even want to come and save us,
Mm.
which I mean, it's either hilarious or sad, depending on your perspective, but that's the reality of the situation that we're dealing with. So it's kind of like I think whoever advises Donald Trump is either a very evil person or a very intelligent person or both, but they have figured out the exact point at which any sort of broad-based local resistance in Nigeria can be broken. They figured out the exact point, the exact button to push where people who would otherwise be rational, where people who would otherwise understand concepts like sovereignty have just completely taken leave of their minds because they feel like this is a Christian conflict and their Christian brothers in the US are coming to save the day. Uncle Sam
Yeah.
is coming riding in with the cavalry. So you try telling these people that actually this has nothing to do with you. At best, you're just a convenient means to an end, that this has nothing to do with your faith and this has everything to do with things under your feet, which are deemed to be more valuable than you. And they just really struggle to understand it. And
Yeah.
that's the, I guess, the genius of the strategy that has been deployed by the Trump administration.
What about the government? So I understand there's some people in Nigeria who are thinking, yes, this is great. Come rescue us. But what about the government? Are they buying this? Or are they saying, uh-oh, don't show up because every time you guys show up, bad things happen?
So the thing with the current Nigerian government is that it was basically installed by the US, by the Biden administration. So in for lack of a better term, is what you'd call a puppet government. So yes, they've put out a few half-hearted statements. A few government people have gone on like RT, which is like going on RT is a huge statement of intent in these parts because Nigeria is usually so captured by America that to even appear on a Russian channel is as good as like declaring war on the
Mm.
US in the popular imagination of Nigeria. So few government people have done that. And there's been a bit of this kabuki theater going on. Well, by and large, the truth is this is not a government that is ever going to directly get into conflict with the US government. It just fundamentally isn't set up for that. So what's probably going to happen after the local theatrics, because they've a few protests which are obviously sponsored and the usual local theatrics, but beyond that, what's eventually almost certainly going to happen is that the president, he's going to end up going to Washington D.C. and he's going to end up meeting with either of Trump or JD Vance, and they're going to put him through that humiliation ritual that they did to Cyril Ramaphosa of South Africa,
Yeah.
and then probably get him to sign up to some concession or agreements which will almost certainly have the term rare earth minerals involved in it,
Hmm.
and then they'll declare victory and declare to their base in America that the Nigerian Christians have been rescued, the Christians have been saved, and everyone will go home happy, except the Nigerian Christians, obviously. But who cares about them?
Thank you for watching this clip from the full Kim Iverson show, which you can catch Monday through Friday, 2 p.m. Pacific, 5 p.m. Eastern at KimIversonShow.com. It is free for you to watch. Again, 2 p.m. Pacific, 5 p.m. Eastern, KimIversonShow.com. See you there.